Hello and a very warm welcome back to the garden. Today I'm going to show you how the very simple way of planting an apple tree, but you can apply this for any fruit tree. Recently we've planted a new orchard here at our experimental site of 60 trees. I had a few trees left and thought, let's make a tutorial. So the first thing you need to think about is you need to look for a blank space to plant a tree, and you need to think about rootstocks. This can cover so many different things, so just do a little bit of research, get a good understanding about the eventual end height of the tree, and always remember that trees tend to cast shade behind, so you want to make sure that when they do grow up that they're not going to cause any issues. But having a tree is a really nice way to add a bit of structure to your site. But this video is mainly focusing on the technique. Now, I know all too well how much we want to look after our plants and welcome them, especially with our annual vegetables. We know they want lots of compost, but this is a compost and fertility free way of planting a tree, because rather than putting all the fertility in the hole, I want to encourage the roots to go searching for the fertility. My dad's orchard, which he planted when I was 2 years old, has never had any compost or fertility added, and the trees there produce amazing yields. So we're just keeping this as natural as possible. So I'm going to start off with the very first step, which is to cut a hole. Now, you don't want to cut a circular hole, you want to cut a square hole. There's been a lot of different articles about this. The reason why you go for a square hole is because if you have imagine a circular hole, the hole itself is going to have all of that loose soil, and then it's going to have this kind of harder soil all around, so it can cause the roots to spiral. So instead, by creating a square hole, when a root hits a corner, it encourages the root of the tree to go in to the ground around and to create a much stronger root system. I now cut out my square. You want to aim to lift the whole block out like that. And now I'm just going to start to loosen it up a little bit. This is the tree that we're going to be planting, and it's a bare root, so you don't want the roots to dry out. I've just got it from where we had it healed in. So for the time being, I'm just going to measure to see roughly if I need to make my square a bit bigger, which I do, but when I don't need it, I'm going to use this lump of turf to tuck the roots underneath, just to prevent them from drying out. So now it's a case of making the square a little bit bigger. So I'm going to have this turf pile on one side, and then on my left hand side is where I'm going to start to pile all of this nice soil. What I mentioned earlier is I'm not going to be using any compost because this topsoil is fine. If you've got particularly terrible soil, then you might have to add some kind of fertility. You'd want to make the hole around 3 times the size, and to really mix in a good amount of, say, broken down muck, and that will make a nice difference. But for the majority of cases, especially if you have like kind of a clay-based topsoil or a nice loam, you don't need to add any fertility at all. So I'm starting to excavate this hole. Once I start making a depth to it, this is when I'm going to start to measure where to plant, how deep I need this hole. So from what I can see from where it's healed in, you've got to find the point of the tree where it turns from roots to the actual tree. You don't want to plant a tree too shallow and have roots exposed. You don't want to plant a tree too deep because it can cause the stem to rot. So you've got to find the point where the roots turn into a stem. For me, I feel that is here. Usually if you haven't healed it in, the easiest way to spot is that there's a colour change from where it turns from roots to stem, because thanks to the sun it can bleach the bark. Again, I'm just going to check the depth, and now I feel that the hole is plenty deep enough for the roots. And before you put the tree in, depending on the type of rootstock, the tree might need support. This here is a M116 rootstock, which is quite a nice size for smaller spaces. It's not going to grow to a full-size tree, but it does need a bit of support. So I'm going to put this back underneath again. You know, it's so important to keep these roots as moist as possible. And now it's a case of putting in this stake. The positioning of this is really important. You want to understand where the prevailing wind comes from and put this on the closest corner. Because if I put the stake here and planted the tree here, the wind is going to push the tree into the stake, which can damage it. However, by putting the stake firmly in front, it's almost acting as a protective barrier to keep the tree in place. So this is going in the very corner. You can use a mallet, but I've got a post knocker for this. And I want to make sure that it's kind of as upright as possible. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but I need to make sure that it is nice and secure. So this is nice and secure now, and also when I fill it back in, it's going to secure it even more. It's now time to put the tree in. A little trick that you can do using a spade is to lay it across, and that can help mark where the surface level is. So if you're a bit unsure about the depth, you can use a spade to help guide that. The tree here, you want it to be up against the support stake fairly close, and I put the stake in first because if I plant the tree and then drive the stake in, firstly I could damage the tree knocking it, and secondly the stake could go through some of the primary roots. For me, just checking the depth, that's exactly where I need it. It's just a couple of inches away from the stake. You can see that these two line up, they parallel quite nice, and now it's time to start putting the soil back in. So again, I just taking my time and making sure that there are no air pockets when I fill in around the roots. So the first few loads of soil, I'm just kind of being nice and delicate, and shaking the tree will cause the soil to fall down in between any gaps between the roots underneath, and again take out those air pockets. Once the majority of the roots are covered, I can then bring back the rest of this pile of soil around the tree. And this tree now is perfectly in line, protected from the prevailing wind. With this initial soil level, I'm just going to gently pat it down around, just so it's roughly the same level all around the hole. I know all too well how easy it is to plant something and forget to water it. So you want to make sure before I finish off planting it to give it a nice soaking, just to help welcome it into the new home. So I'll let that go down, and then I'll probably do around 5 litres of water per bare root tree that I put in. This has now been watered, and because I haven't firmed it in, there's still a lot of give, which is absolutely fine, but I do want this tree to stay. So using this turf pile that I took off initially, there's 2 stages to this. The first stage is to get your spade and to kind of chip away the bottom layer of soil, which I can also start to push in and around. But we're going to use absolutely everything. So once we've planted this tree, there's going to be no excess waste around. So it's actually a really nice tidy way, and you won't have any weird bits of turf to deal with after. So that's all of the grassless soil put in. I'm going to do an initial little pat down just to start to secure it. And now, using the turf flipped upside down like this, I can tear it apart if I need to, especially if we're going around the base of the tree. But I'm going to place this down you could almost imagine this as a bit like an inverse mulch, but it's a nice mulching layer, and by doing it upside down, you're not going to let that grass to grow through straight away. It's really important for fruit trees to have a clear stem, as clear as possible. So even if you are going to mulch them, which I'll mulch this after, you don't want the mulch touching the stem. The goal is that once I step down on this is going to be the exact same level as the grass around it and exactly at the depth that we want this tree to be. So just carefully, again, you can hold the tree in position. I'm just going to go around with my foot and really secure it in place. And I can see now that this is perfectly level. And I'm just going to work around it. Remember to do it around the post, up as close as possible to the tree. As you can see, that is standing there nicely. The next stage is to secure this to the post. There's so many different types of straps out there, so I'm not going to give a tutorial on that because there's loads to choose from. If you are though using a tree guard, if you've got rabbit problems for example, now would be the ideal time to put the tree guard on before you then secure it with a strap. The tree is now planted. Make sure that there's a bit of leeway in the strap. You can get ones that you can adjust to size, so as a tree grows you can adjust the strap nicely. The final thing I'm going to do is, this is just some hay, is I'm just going to mulch around, not up against the stem but around the stem. The main goal for this is to keep in the moisture, to keep in the water in the soil, because if we get some dry weather, usually I never bother watering a fruit tree as soon as it's planted, so I just want to make sure that its first few months of life is going to have plenty of moisture in the ground. And so there you have it. That is the very simple way of planting a fruit tree, just getting it into the ground. The best time to do this is during dormancy if it's bare root, but if it's in a pot you can do it all year, but preferably during the dormancy period. If you want to take your fruit tree planting to the next level, you may want to consider creating a guild. And my friend Niall from Niall's Garden has made a video which you can watch right here, so you can learn all about creating a fruit tree guild.